Fellowship of the Broken, Making Sense of 12-Step Recovery by Angelo. Chapter 39, Step 7. Quote, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. Close quote. Step 7 is the shortest of the 12 steps. There are just 7 words, yet these few words have far-reaching implications. The word humbly means meekly or with humility. The word asked means requested, petitioned, implored, or prayed. The word him is one of the many God words. The word remove is the same as in step 6 and means to take off, take away, dismiss, or abolish. And the word shortcomings is a substitute for defects of character in step 6 and means faults, shortcomings, or imperfections in the mental and moral qualities distinctive to an individual. Once we are entirely ready in step 6, we now petition or pray with humility for the whole extent of the faults in our personal, mental and moral qualities to be taken away or abolished. We now see why the willingness required in step 6 is so necessary. And we also see why the humility arising from steps 4 and 5 is crucial. Without willingness and humility, step 7 is unlikely to have much impact. The wording in the Big Book suggests that we again use prayer to make this petition. The religiosity of the wording is once more irrelevant, but the words do provide significant insight. The step 7 prayer reads, quote, my Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. Close quote. Well, this prayer is step 7. Notice that the wording mentions all of me, good and bad. The clear implication here is that we are willing to surrender the whole personal ego self, including those parts of us that we may consider to be good. And notice also that the removal of the defects of character is not offered for personal gain, but so that we can be useful to consciousness and hence to our fellow human beings. This prayer is again selfless rather than selfish, and such selflessness is a true expression of humility. Referring to the original drafting of the 12 steps, I previously mentioned that the words on our knees and holding nothing back were deleted. Presumably these changes were made to tone down the overly religious nature of the original wording. But nevertheless they are worth considering. The idea of being on our knees does evoke an image of earnest prayer, but it can also just imply genuine humility. Being on our knees is a popular turn of phrase that's used to indicate brokenness. Exhaustion brings us to our knees, and so too does suffering. And the idea of holding nothing back indicates complete surrender and literally suggests that nothing is held back. This would include those parts of ourselves that we consider good, as well as the more obvious shortcomings. The deletion of these two phrases may have inadvertently softened the seriousness of step 7, but hopefully the wording of the prayer makes the intention very clear. The main message of step 7 in the book Drop the Rock is that we cannot expect God, as we may understand the word, to remove our shortcomings without our cooperation and active participation. We have the inventory of negative attributes of the human ego mind, and we have the list of the spiritual qualities of consciousness that are the polar opposite. Our job is to act as if we are living the spiritual qualities until such time as they become habitual and automatic. It's worth remembering that these attributes of consciousness are already present as the being, but to date have been largely overshadowed by the self-centered traits of the human ego mind. It's practically impossible to surrender the entire personal self in one go, so the suggestion is that we work towards this state by acting as if we are already there. This is the process by which the balance of identity gradually shifts from human to being, and this is a key part of the practice of self-awareness. This is best demonstrated by using an example. If one of our recognized defects of character is dishonesty, then the obvious solution is to be honest. If we cease to be dishonest, then we automatically become honest. We naturally become the spiritual quality by dropping the ego trait. The problem is that dishonesty has become so much a part of the personal ego mind that it's almost impossible to drop it in isolation. The solution would be to drop the entire personal mind, but this is also nearly impossible. The way to move forwards is to act as if we are honest. This will involve being self-aware enough to notice when we are tempted to be dishonest, and then choosing to behave honestly. In this way we assist the process of surrendering the personal ego self by continually changing our behaviours to those of non-personal consciousness. Given the long list of ego traits that we have seen, this will require an ongoing commitment to recognizing and changing our habitual behaviour. Sometimes we will succeed, and other times we will have reacted and behaved from ego self before we even notice. This is all okay. The purpose is gradual improvement rather than perfection. You may have noticed that this suggestion of acting as if sounds very similar to cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. In fact, step 7 can be seen as CBT in a different guise. CBT is a combination of the basic principles of behaviorism and cognitive psychology. It focuses on challenging and changing distortions in thoughts, beliefs, attitudes and behaviors, and improving emotional regulation through coping strategies that address specific problems. The basic idea is that a repetitive, action-oriented form of therapy will replace old neural pathways with more beneficial new ones, and that the resulting new thoughts and behaviors will improve emotional and mental health. In this respect, it can be seen that the practice of step 7, as detailed in Drop the Rock, is pure CBT. The repetitive use of spiritual qualities instead of personal ego traits will replace old negative habits with new neural pathways in the brain. These new neural pathways will process consciousness differently than before. It's therefore not true to say that CBT is an alternative to 12-step recovery. The principles of CBT are embedded in the 12 steps. This is most noticeable in step 7, but the same principle of repetitive practice also applies to all of the steps. This is particularly true for steps 10, 11 and 12, as we shall see later. It's fair to say that CBT is a useful tool, but it's not true to say that CBT is the whole toolbox. There is more to recovery than simply changing some of the negative habits of the personal self. A literal understanding of Step 7 would be that we hand over our identified defects of character to whatever convenient third-party understanding of the God word we may have. This is effectively an abdication of the problem to someone or something else, and hence avoids personal responsibility for change. All we have to do is say the prayer and then hope that God will take away all of our difficulties. This is obviously rather naive, although unsurprising given the wording of the step. The personal ego mind can be very subtle in interpreting words to satisfy its own agenda. A deeper understanding would be in line with drop the rock. It would mean acting as if we already have undergone a psychic change. Every time a defect of character arises, we would firstly need to recognize it as such, and then choose to react or behave in accordance with spiritual qualities. This will be far from easy, because we will be acting against our basic ego instincts, and we will naturally make mistakes, and will need to persist in trying to behave differently. We will also need to keep learning from these mistakes, so that we become more self-aware. This will be like a caterpillar choosing to react and behave like a butterfly. It will feel inauthentic and incongruous for a while, but at least it will be an improvement on the old ways, and it will be aiding the process of transformation. The practice of spiritual qualities in this manner gives rise to the idea of always doing the next right thing. And the word right in this context means selfless rather than selfish. This use of self-will to bring about any change may have to continue for the rest of our lives, unless and until the balance of identity finally shifts from personal ego self to non-personal consciousness. The next level of understanding would be that all of the traits of the human ego mind dominate instinctively only because we identify ourselves solely as the personal self. It is this identification with the personal self that is the root of all the problems. These ego traits are not mistakes or sins, but they are instead the inevitable implication of the original sin of misidentification. The purpose of Step 7 is intended to be the gradual realization of this core mistake. We keep acting as if we are grounded in spiritual qualities until such time as we completely surrender the personal self and abide as non-personal consciousness. When this happens, the spiritual qualities then become natural rather than the result of effort. The individual self will still be present, and so too will all of the ego traits, but the personal ego self will have been right-sized and will no longer dominate the individual thoughts, feelings and behavior. There will be times when the ego self provides useful thoughts and reactions, but the power of discernment will reside at a much deeper level of consciousness. This abiding in non-personal consciousness will allow the being to determine which course of action to take in any given circumstance, and knowingness will naturally become spontaneous. The deepest level of understanding of Step 7 would be that we became entirely ready in Step 6 to surrender the personal ego mind in favour of universal mind. The implications of this surrender is to act in accordance with spiritual qualities at all times. There is awareness of how the individual ego mind continues to operate but we remain grounded in consciousness. As we abide as universal mind, the light of consciousness shines through the lens of Antakarana, and this gradually purifies the subtle and causal levels of ego and soul. Eventually, the guna of sattva becomes dominant, and the ahamkara identifies more and more as pure, non-personal consciousness. The qualities of non-personal consciousness rise to the surface and are expressed through the individual body and mind. The butterfly emerges from the chrysalis. The prodigal son makes his way home. My own original experience of step 7 was the same as for step 6. Both of these steps were forgotten because I had no concept of the God word to which I could petition. Thankfully this changed once I read Drop the Rock, and I began to see that this greater power from step 2 was internal rather than third party. Step 7 is now part of my daily prayers, and also increasingly part of my moment-to-moment self-awareness. My inherent brokenness as a human means that I can never practice step 7 perfectly, but my experience has been that consistent, persistent practice does move us in that direction. Setbacks and mistakes are inevitable and forgivable. Indeed, it can be seen that mistakes are necessary in order to continue the process of refinement and growth. The important thing is to keep moving forwards.